folks. Welcome to another week of Stronger. We shifted on Sunday from Abraham to Jacob, and we'll be coming back to Abraham. We're going to be with these guys for a bit, but there's a flow that I want to stay with. And we introduced about Jacob, how maybe feel more like him than we do Abraham. The guy had severe struggles with things in his life, and we covered that and went through some of his story. But it was really about a dream, and this dream gets passed on, as we talked about in the story on Sunday, from Abraham to Isaac, and now to Jacob, when he's running away from Esau and home and going to a far country. And he gets the dream of the stairway between heaven and earth. Yeah. See, we always thought that was a song by
Stairway to Heaven.
But it's a Jacob original. There you go, yeah. And so you've got the angels going up and down on there. I think that's cool, the interaction between heaven and earth. It just really pictures that. But the idea being that Jacob now is Abrahamic covenant fully. He never had to do any of the cheating he actually did in life to advance himself. God had it all. Yeah. And so we took a look at some things about dream and moving it forward, and we talked about one of the phases, if you're going to have a dream that you're going to have to go through, is you're going to have to go through crises, because God is always more interested in what you're becoming than what he's going to do through you. Right. We always think I think as hirelings, like God's he's going to do this through me. He's going to do that. Yeah. And God says, you're my eternal daughter. You're my eternal son. This is where, I'm really looking at what you're becoming. I want you to become this. And he's always more interested in that. And crises is the thing that in my life has worked out harder than anything.
Absolutely.
The pressure. Yeah,
absolutely. I think crises can't help but change you in some form, whether it's for the better or not. And certainly if we're following on this trajectory and going after a dream that God's given us or a promise, then hopefully the crises we're going through is going to bring us to a point of drawing closer to him and becoming more like him.
And of course, that's his real work. Yeah. And it's sort of like what he does through is a bonus. But the real work is I'm investing in who you are and who you're going to be. Yeah. And he's working towards that. Now, we're working with this overall theme, time to move on. And that's what you need to do with crises. Yeah. You've got to grow. You've got to move on and go through it. And we find this guy had a crisis in a few. So I'm going to pull back a scripture from Sunday out of Hosea. And in Hosea 12:3, it says, even in the womb, Jacob struggled with his brother, Esau. Yeah. Remember, he's hanging on to his heel and they're born. Yeah. And it's like, I'm pulling you back in and I'm coming out first. That's his whole life. Yeah. He's going to come out first. That was his whole deal. And when he became a man, he even fought with God. I love the way he puts it. He even fought with God, And he did. He had that wrestling match with him years after he received the Abrahamic promise. Right. And he gets into this crisis with Esau's coming now because he's returning home and he thinks there's going to be war and he's wrestling with God all night. I guess that sets up for you and I a couple of things that we have to pay attention to. Crises is something that we don't like.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But it can be the point of God's greatest work. It's very necessary for shaping us. And it was very necessary for Jacob. It's very necessary for us.
Absolutely.
My first thing is to escape crisis.
Totally. Yeah. And I can't remember. I think maybe it was Peter that said, "Consider it pure joy when you go through these trials and all these things." The older I get, the more I'm really starting to understand that. Like I didn't really grasp that. I understood the logic of it, but I didn't really grasp it in my younger years. But I'm really starting to see that really is what makes us, and I'm understanding more and more how God does change us through those things, and for the better if we allow Him to. You're able to see things through a whole new light that you wouldn't have been able to see them in that way before, and assess situations and use wisdom that you wouldn't have had. Like I'm really starting to grasp that.
I can definitely relate to that, wanting to escape it. It's like that addiction to comfort almost, right? When it hits, it's so uncomfortable. It's so painful. And I do immediately, my mind and my heart just wants to do whatever I can to get to the next most comfortable spot in my life, or the least painful.
Just to retreat.
Resolve, Definitely as I'm maturing and as I've gone through some crises that there was no other way but to surrender to God and walk with him through it. I can see the benefit of that. And I've had that several times, but that immediate flesh feeling is, get me out of this now.
Yeah, totally.
And that was Jacob. He was an escaper, right?
Yeah.
Up until he couldn't escape. So he'd run it as long as he could until I'm cornered.
Yeah.
And then he'd have to run again. Yeah.
And life corners us. God corners us.
God corners us.
And so he ends up in a corner.
Yeah.
And him and God have this wrestling match. But there's a couple of things you see. There's a difference from escape and time to move on.
Yes.
And there's a couple of questions that you need to answer properly.
Yes.
From your heart to move on from crises. And those were the point of this second wrestling match, where he's wrestling with God about what's coming. And he's got to make a few decisions. One is, are you willing to obey what God has asked you to do?
Right.
Secondly, are you willing to trust that God's going to look after this? So this obey what you know you should, and then trust.
Yeah.
Jacob did neither in his wrestling matches with man and with God. He was always taking, I'm going to cheat you, I'm going to manipulate you, I'm going to do this. That's
do it my own way.
Not obeying or trusting.
Right, and he was in the process of needing to become someone, a certain someone, to carry on this covenant and this dream that God wanted to work through him. So this, he needed to answer these questions properly, and God didn't let him just, go on that way. God stopped him, cornered him, made him face it, until he got to that point of, I will obey, and I will trust.
Yeah, we can use that as an example in our own lives whenever we're in crisis with other people or with God, if we're wrestling with him for whatever reason. If we haven't settled these questions, as you said, in our heart, then that is what we're going to do. We're just going to keep running. We're just going to keep running in any way we can, manipulate, escape, whatever. And you're never actually able to fully move on, which is what we're talking about, time to move on.
We are. And if I was to apply that, this is where depending on what crisis you're in, but if I had to take one that pretty much everybody experiences over and over again, there's several, but relationship crises.
Yes, totally.
Right.
You go through a relationship crisis, and you're in a wrestle with the person, and you're in a wrestle with God.
Yep.
All that does is deepen the hole,
Yes.
And then God is saying, look, you need to forgive, or you need to bring this in and quit holding back, or he's asking you to do something, and your disobedience to that, your unwillingness to actually do that, is going to keep you in it, and the crisis deepens rather than you can't move on. It's time to move on, but you won't move on because you won't let go. You won't bring what you need to, or you won't let go of what you need to.
Yes, that's a really good point. And I kind of have a personal gauge when it comes to those relational crisis type situations. It's, am I losing sleep over this? Because if I'm losing sleep over it, then it means I probably haven't either forgiven or released or asked for forgiveness and then trusted God. I haven't done one or both of those things. As soon as I apply this and move forward and do these things, I forgive or release and then trust God, I sleep like a baby. And nothing else has changed except for my decision on it.
Exactly. Your positioning with God and with people. So there's the obedience part will be something with the person too, right? You may have to bring something or let something go, but whatever it is, it's going to take you to a different level. You brought up the word trust, which is the next word, which is, are you really willing to trust God kind of to take this, or your future, right? And we don't want to trust him with this. We want so hard to control it, minimizing pain, maximizing pleasure to such an extent that we don't want to trust him to look after it. you know?
Which is really foolish when we sit here talking about it, and I'm thinking, how foolish. Why do I want to control this when I know I can't do what God can do through this situation?
Exactly.
But man, when you are in it, that is like, to me, that just seems like the right thing to do. And I got this. I got this, until, like you said, I'm just digging myself deeper and deeper into that hole. And when I think back, it's nonsense. But in the moment, that is... It's
what you go for, and you probably heard this a million times where, okay, you do what you can, and then you trust God to do the rest, or the impossible, or whatever, right? And it's like, yeah, for sure. And then all of a sudden it hits, and you're like, well, but...
Maybe I never could do any of it.
That's right.
And this is with God's dream, I think, just to bring it to you tonight on a close on this is, look, on God's dream, God doesn't give you a dream and say, now you go do it.
Yeah.
God gives you a dream, and he's the only one that can bring it about through your obedience and through your trust.
Yeah.
So we need to obey what we know God says, and we need to trust what God can do. Yeah. And in doing that, you're going to find that you can actually move on and just not be trying to escape from every situation in life where you can't manipulate yourself out of the corner. And, there's a better way.
Yes.
Choose his.
Yes.